They laughed, didn't they? They pointed, whispered, doubted, like your silence was failure, like your struggle was the end of the story, but they had no idea what was coming, no idea that behind every silent step you were sharpening the edge they couldn't see. This is not just a story of pain, this is a story of power, your power, because now the ones who laughed, they're silent, and you're just getting started. Let's begin. They thought your silence meant you had nothing to say, that your quietness was fear, uncertainty, maybe even surrender. They laughed because they mistook stillness for surrender, but they never understood you weren't hiding. You were studying, observing, preparing. Every time they laughed, you learned what weakness looked like in disguise. You saw the way they needed an audience to feel powerful. You saw how their voices got louder the more insecure they became. And while they performed, you disappeared into your grind. You let them think they were ahead. Let them believe the game was already over. You kept your head down while they looked for spotlights, and in that silence you became dangerous, because silence isn't absence, it's focus, and focus is lethal when you've been underestimated long enough. They don't know what it's like to rebuild yourself quietly. Hold your breath in a room full of people who think they know your limits, to smile at the ones who doubted you while you counted every scar like armor. They don't know what it's like to carry fire in your chest and never let it show, but you do, you lived it. You didn't clap back when they laughed. You didn't defend yourself when they joked. You didn't beg for belief. You just worked, alone, tired, misunderstood, with nothing but that voice in your head whispering, wait. And they thought they won. They thought you gave up, that you were too soft, too broken, too small to matter. But you weren't soft, you were sharpening. You weren't broken, you were building. You were turning everything they said into a tool, every smirk into strength, every dismissive glance into direction. Because silence, when held long enough, becomes thunder, and now they hear it. Now the same ones who laughed are quiet. The same voices that mocked you can't find the words, because you didn't show up with excuses. You showed up with results. You didn't beg to be seen, you became undeniable. It's funny how they only understand your worth after you stop asking for it. How they only see your power. Once they realized they were never in control, they thought they were writing your ending, but you were still on the first chapter. They thought the silence was a grave, but it was a womb. You were being reborn. You were becoming something their minds couldn't contain, and now they have no choice but to watch. The silence they mocked is the same silence that made you dangerous, because while they spoke, you stacked. While they laughed, you learned. While they rested, you refused to sleep on yourself, and in that quiet space where most people break, you became unshakable. Now they realized you weren't the one behind. They were just too loud to notice how far ahead you were becoming. You never needed to yell. You never needed to prove them wrong with words. You just needed time. Time to become. Time to rise. Time to remind the world that silence doesn't mean surrender, it means you're about to change everything. Let them talk, let them joke. You've got something louder than words now, proof. They threw their insults like daggers, thinking they'd cut you down, thinking you'd fold under the weight of their judgment, their smirks, their careless words meant to belittle what they couldn't understand. But what they didn't realize was simple. You were built for fire. Every cruel word, every mocking laugh, every sarcastic "you'll never make it" didn't kill you, it fed you. They thought they were hurting you, and for a moment, maybe they did. Maybe the sting landed. Maybe you sat alone wondering if they were right, but then something shifted. You didn't run from the pain. You swallowed it, turned it into pressure, let it settle in your bones until it became fuel. While they were wasting breath, you were turning wounds into weapons. You didn't need their approval. You needed their doubt, because doubt sharpens ambition in a way that comfort never could. The more they laughed, the more you trained. The more they mocked, the more you focused. They thought they were breaking you, but all they were doing was building the fire that would eventually burn everything they thought they knew about you. They thought their words had power, but the real power, that was in the silence after the insult. The part where you didn't clap back, didn't explain yourself, didn't lower yourself to their level. You just stared straight ahead, like someone who had already seen the future, and it didn't look like them. Every insult reminded you of who you weren't. You weren't weak. You weren't finished. You weren't going to be defined by anyone else's opinion. Every time they told you what you couldn't do, it helped you remember exactly what you were meant to become. You took every "you're not enough" and turned it into "watch me." You turned their laughter into obsession, their dismissal into motivation, their doubt into discipline. They fed you without knowing it. You didn't just grow in spite of them. You grew because of them, because there's something about being told you're nothing that makes you want to become everything. Something about being overlooked that makes you sharpen every edge. They thought they were burying you, but they were only adding weight to the bar, and the more weight they added, the stronger you got. That's the part they'll never understand, the part that doesn't make sense to people who have never been underestimated. You didn't need applause, you needed pressure. You didn't need support, you needed resistance, because you don't build champions with praise, you build them with rejection. So no, the insult didn't destroy you, they clarified you. They carved out the parts of you that were still seeking validation and left behind something harder, something colder, something unstoppable. And now, the same mouths that used to laugh, quiet, the same people who once doubted you, watching, wondering how the person they threw away came back too big to ignore. They thought they were setting limits on your life, but all they really did was set the stage for your comeback. Because when you learn how to take hate and make it fuel, you become dangerous. You don't flinch, you don't break, you don't even react. You just build, and then one day they look up, and there you are, unrecognizable, unapologetic, unmatched. So the next time they insult you, don't shrink. Let it hit, let it burn, and then let it feed something deeper, something they can't reach. Let every word remind you that you don't owe them an explanation. You owe yourself results. You owe yourself revenge. Not with anger, but with excellence. That's how you win, you rise. There's something about pain that praise will never teach you. Praise is easy, it's soft, it feels good, but it doesn't change you, it doesn't shape you. It tells you you're fine just the way you are. Pain doesn't do that. Pain looks you in the face and says, this is where you're weak. This is where you've been lying to yourself. A pain doesn't flatter you, it exposes you. You didn't learn strength from being applauded. You learned it from being abandoned, from watching people walk away when you needed them most. You learned it in the silence after the door slammed, in the long nights where no one checked in the mornings when you had to drag yourself out of bed with nothing but grit and your own breath holding you together. That's where the growth happened, not in the spotlight, but in the dark. They think strength comes from success, but they're wrong. Strength is born in the breaking. It's forged in failure, betrayal, disappointment, all the things that strip you down until there's nothing left but your will. Praise might make you feel good, but pain is what makes you real. It cuts away the fluff. It shows you what's solid and what was never meant to last. People love the version of you that smiles, that wins, that keeps everything together. But that version, it didn't exist without the one who suffered, the one who broke down quietly behind closed doors, the one who cried in silence but still showed up. You didn't become strong by accident. You became strong because life forced you to either break or rebuild, and you chose to rebuild. Pain made you pay attention to your habits, your thoughts, your surroundings. It made you realize who was real and who was temporary, who stood beside you and who only came around when things were easy. Praise didn't show you any of that. Praise just kept you comfortable. Pain woke you up, and yes, it hurt, but it taught you how to endure, how to keep moving when everything inside you screamed to stop, how to take rejection and keep standing, how to take loss and still choose love, how to take betrayal and not let it turn you bitter. That's not something applause can give you. That's something you earn the hard way. You learned more from one heartbreak than you did from 1,000 compliments, more from one failure than 100 victories, because pain doesn't lie. It tells you exactly where you stand. It doesn't sugarcoat. It doesn't care about your excuses. It demands change or it breaks you. But the truth is you didn't break. You bent. You bled. You struggled, but you didn't shatter. You endured. And in that endurance you became someone different, someone sharper, somewhat clearer, someone who doesn't need approval to feel worthy, someone who doesn't need the crowd to feel powerful. Now you understand. Praise was never the point. It was never about being liked. It was about being whole. And sometimes wholeness comes through being torn apart first. That's the cruel Gift of pain, it destroys the illusion so you can find the truth. And the truth is, you didn't need their applause. You needed the fire. You needed the test. You needed to be stripped of everything so you could see what was unshakable inside you. They don't know what that feels like, to build yourself from the ground up without a hand to hold, to wipe your own tears and still get up and grind, to walk back into the room after they laughed, after they left, after they doubted, and stand taller than ever. They don't know, but you do, and that's why you walk different now. That's why you... Silence feels like strength because you earned it through things they'll never understand. So let them chase praise, let them crave attention. You've already been through the fire, you've already faced yourself, and when you survive that kind of pain, you don't need anyone to tell you who you are. You already know. They watched you slow down, and they thought you stopped, watched you go quiet, and they assumed you gave up. That's the problem with people who have never had to build anything real. They mistake movement for progress and stillness for failure. But what they didn't see was what was happening behind the delay. They didn't see the grind beneath the surface, the work that was happening where no one could clap, where no one was watching. They just saw the pause and they called it defeat, but it wasn't defeat, it was recalibration. You were stepping back to find your center again. You were healing in silence, fixing the cracks, strengthening what had been stretched too thin. They thought you were finished, but you were just preparing, because the most dangerous people in any arena are the ones who disappear and come back different. They saw the surface, the missed calls, the unanswered texts, the months without updates, and in their shallow minds they filled in the blanks with stories of your failure. They lost their edge. They're done. They peaked. But you weren't done. You were just shifting, just outgrowing the version of yourself they thought they knew. You didn't need to prove anything during the delay. That's where people misunderstand. You weren't delaying because you were weak. You were delaying because you knew there was more in you, more to build, more to become. The delay wasn't fear, it was patience, and patience is something people who always need to be seen will never understand. You sat in the dark while they laughed in the light. You sat with the discomfort, with the questions, with the fear, and you didn't run from it. You faced it, and while they mistook your pause for collapse, you were just loading something bigger. Real growth doesn't happen in public. It happens when no one's around, when it's just you, the silence, and the decision to keep going without applause. So yes, you were quiet. Yes, you took your time, but there's power in the wait. There's power in walking away from the noise and doing the work. Without validation, that's what makes you different. You never needed to announce the comeback. You were always going to let the results speak for themselves. And now that they see you again, they don't recognize you because you're not moving the way you used to. You're not reacting the way you used to. The delay built clarity. It built discipline. It reminded you who you are, even when no one's cheering. And now you don't need the noise. They do. That's the shift. That's the part they never saw coming. You used the delay. You turned what they called defeat into development. And now they're scrambling to understand how the one they wrote off became the one they can't ignore. They were so busy watching for signs of collapse, they never noticed the foundation being rebuilt right beneath their feet. That's the power of being underestimated. That's the beauty of silence. When they think you're done, they stop watching, they relax, they laugh, they get comfortable, and by the time they realize you were never out of the fight, you've already won. So let them keep misreading the pause, let them assume the worst, let them tell their stories, because you know the truth, you know what it took, and you know what's coming next. Let the world mistake your delay for defeat. You'll show them what patience really creates. They saw your calm and thought it meant you had no power. They looked at your quiet eyes, your measured steps, your lack of noise, and they told themselves there was nothing to fear. That's how small minds operate. They equate loudness with strength, flash with fire. But what they didn't understand is that real storms don't announce themselves with chaos. They come in silence, they come steady, they come slow, and then they tear everything apart. You didn't need to raise your voice. You didn't need to defend yourself or beg them to see your worth. You were the storm, and storms don't explain. You were building something bigger than they could understand. Patience, discipline, focus. While they were chasing attention, you were building pressure, quietly, relentlessly, and they never saw it coming. They were too busy looking for signs of failure to recognize the signs of transformation. You weren't stuck, you were still. You weren't lost, you were locked in. And every moment they thought they were ahead of you, you were moving with precision. Whisper by whisper, brick by brick, until what you had inside of you was no longer a spark. It was a flood, a fire, a force. They underestimated you because they couldn't hear you. That's where they failed. They forgot that not all storms come with thunder. Some arrive with still skies, silent air, no warnings, and then everything changes. That's how you moved. That's how you grew. They kept waiting for the noise, for the signs, for the breakdown, but you didn't give them that. You didn't hand them the satisfaction. You just stayed the course, and then you struck. Now they're scrambling to understand how the one they dismissed turned into a force they can't ignore. They don't know how to respond to someone who didn't need to scream to be dangerous, someone who never asked to be seen but became undeniable. You didn't rise for their approval. You rose because there was a storm in your bones that couldn't stay silent forever. They called you soft because you didn't fight back the way they expected. They thought you were fragile because you didn't flinch. But what they didn't realize is that you weren't avoiding the fight. You were becoming the storm that ends it. Quiet strength is the kind they fear the most, because it doesn't react, it doesn't entertain, it doesn't warn. It just comes, and when it does, it changes everything. So let them think your whisper means you're weak. Let them confuse calm for surrender, because when you move with the kind of force they never saw coming. And by the time they feel it, by the time they realize what's hit them, it's already too late. That's the beauty of restraint. That's the power of quiet strength. It builds, it waits, and then it breaks everything they thought was secure. You never had to shout. You never had to demand respect. You just had to stay the course, keep moving, keep building, and now the storm is here, and it has your name on it. You never needed revenge. You just needed time, time to rise, time to become, time to let the weight of everything they did to you press into your bones until it became the foundation beneath your feet. They thought they broke you. They thought they could walk away, tear you down, laugh behind your back, and that you'd crumble, that you'd fall apart, waste your energy chasing them, begging for apologies, wishing for payback. But they didn't understand what you were made of. You weren't built for bitterness. You were built for fire. Revenge was never the goal. You didn't want to hurt them the way they hurt you. That would have made you small. That would have chained you to the same darkness they used to try to control you. And you weren't meant to stay in that place. You weren't meant to spend your life proving points to people who already decided they didn't see your worth. You were meant to rise, quietly, fully, and without permission. They thought they were the center of your story. They thought their betrayal, their doubt, their disrespect would shape who you'd become, but all it did was fuel the transformation, not because you wanted to make them regret it, but because you finally saw what happens when you stop needing anything from people who were never meant to stay. They thought they ended you, but all they did was release you, and it took time. That's what people don't see. It wasn't overnight. You had to bleed in private, had to rebuild yourself piece by piece, had to sit in rooms where the silence screamed louder than any insult ever could. You had to unlearn the lies they convinced you were true, had to stand up alone before you ever felt strong again, but you did it quietly, relentlessly, without letting that anger rot your heart, because real power isn't proving them wrong. It's realizing you never needed their belief in the first place. That's the kind of power they'll never understand. Kind that doesn't rise with revenge in its hands, but with peace in its chest. The kind that doesn't need to destroy anyone else. It just builds something so undeniable, so unshakable, that they have no choice but to watch. And that's what you did. You built, in silence, in pain, in truth. You stopped explaining, you stopped chasing, you stopped trying to make anyone understand. You just worked, and now they don't know how to face you because you didn't come back for them. You came back for yourself. You didn't need revenge. You needed healing, and you earned it. You fought for it. You Carved it out of nights when sleep wouldn't come and days when everything in you wanted to give up. You didn't rise to make them hurt. You rose because you were tired of hurting. You rose because the version of you they thought they destroyed was never the final form. Now look at you, not bitter. Not broken, but better. You don't carry their names on your back anymore. You don't walk into rooms with wounds still open. You've stitched yourself together with discipline, with vision, with quiet fire, and they don't know how to touch you now, not because you're unreachable, but because you finally stopped lowering yourself just to make them comfortable. They wanted a reaction. They wanted you to strike back, to scream, to drown in the same toxicity they tried to wrap you in. But you left all that behind because peace was always more dangerous than payback, and your success, your calm, focused, powerful success, that's louder than revenge ever could be. You never needed revenge. You just needed to remember who you are, and now the laughter has faded, the doubts have vanished. The same mouths that mocked you have nothing left to say because you didn't just survive, you transformed. You didn't scream for revenge. You let your rise do the talking. So remember this, you were never the joke. You were the warning, and next time they laugh, let them, because the storm doesn't explain itself, it just arrives. Until next time, keep moving in silence and let your results speak loud enough for everyone.